So thank you so much. Such a lovely audience, so much energy, a lot of rambunctious energy. Just what we need, right? For is it a Wednesday, Tuesday, Tuesday, I think of that. The week couldn't go by sooner for me. I'm just kidding. I've been looking forward to this event. So really, I'm here to. I was given the mission to talk about future-proofing your careers for the AI-driven era. And this image came to mind. Can anyone tell me which cartoon this image is from? Very good. Yes, right. So Wreck-It Ralph has a little sidekick. What's the name of the little sidekick? She has the cutest name, Vanellope von Schweetz. So in this scene, Wreck-It Ralph and Vanellope von Schweetz are sort of standing on the periphery. They're looking into the internet. And they're so filled with wonderment and awe and amazement as to all the dramatic possibilities that they could explore. But at the same time, I think there's also that sense of trepidation. There's that sense of hesitancy, that sense of fear. Do we know what we're getting into? Right? And in many ways, I feel that this particular image actually captures the state that we're in today. With all of this talk about generative AI, with all of this talk about AI intensification, we're all Wreck-It Ralph and Vanellope von Schweetz. We're all standing here filled with awe, filled with wonderment, but we're also a little bit frightened. So I wanted to just, use this opportunity to maybe take you through a little bit of my own journey as well as my own observations about the digitalization of society, because that's the research that I do. And to tell you that it's okay. There will be certain, things that you can do to prepare yourself and to feel a little bit less hesitant about what comes forward. So let me then present to you this image. Can anyone identify this image in terms of the sort of sociological phenomenon that it is? Yes, it's the Tokyo Metro, and the men in the picture are referred to as what? Very good, but Japanese salarymen. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is obviously because the Japanese salaryman has a particular kind of existence, right? He's hired. He joins the company. He is quite enslaved to the company. He gets out every morning. He wears that, businessman uniform. He works long hours. He gives his life to the company. But the company takes care of him. The company will actually pay him well, stable income, and some companies will even go as far as to organize social events so that these men are able to meet their spouses. So that's the level of care that the Japanese salaryman can experience. And the reason I'm highlighting the Japanese salaryman is because his existence is very, very much unlike what all of us will experience henceforth. Because we're not going to have the Japanese salaryman life. We're not going to have a career for life. We're all going to have a lifetime of careers because there's going to be so many different opportunities that are going to come. There are going to be all kinds of curveballs with industries changing, with the different kinds of disruptions that we're seeing. So the Japanese salaryman is the extreme of what it is we are today, or what it is we are experiencing. So let me just walk you through some of the sort of industry transformations that we're seeing already. Now, just slightly over a year ago, a year and a half ago, was when we started to hear about this thing called ChatGPT, right? And suddenly it just appeared out of nowhere, and it seemed like ChatGPT was it. And indeed, the pace at which ChatGPT has been embraced, the pace at which generative AI has taken over many industries has been nothing short of breathtaking. So if you look at this particular image, it's essentially of a new kind of marketing service where as a marketeer, you want to make sure that your advertisements speak to different market audiences, right? So what did you do in the past? You would actually hire models of different age groups, people who would speak different languages, people of different genders, ethnicities, and so on. Today, you don't have to do any of this hard work of finding all these spokesmen who cater to that long tail of consumers. All you have to do is to use these AI, which will generate these different models, these different spokesmen for you whatever diversity you want. So the automation is tremendous. The efficiencies that you gain are incredible. And it also means that all these companies that used to do this kind of marketing work, they have been severely disrupted, right? Because they're no longer going to have to go out and audition people, choose people of different profiles, and so on. You can just generate whoever you want. And that's how generative AI has transformed marketing. Now, obviously, banking is also where there's been a tremendous frenzy about how they can leverage all kinds of efficiencies from generative AI. So you're seeing, for example, the use of chatbots in customer service facing parts of the bank. You're seeing loan officers actually having the first draft of the loan package being done by generative AI. And then you've got the human in the loop, the banker who comes and reviews it. So there are all of these different kinds of efficiencies. And indeed, I have spoken to many people who are leading digitalization efforts in banks, and they say that the cost savings are so tremendous. They say that they're having to reskill a lot of their employees so that they understand how they can extract maximum utility from all of these new tools. So that's banking for you. Now, next up, healthcare. If you think about healthcare, again, so many possibilities, right? As it is, with the pandemic, I think people became much more comfortable with telemedicine. People became much more comfortable about actually using different kinds of remote health services. And if we think about not just healthcare per se, but also drug discovery, understanding, for example, disease spread, you will realize that, there are so many changes, so many transformations in the healthcare sector, all the way from patient care to to drug discovery, to pharmaceutical innovations, and so on. So again, that's where another industry has been significantly disrupted. And then, of course, there is my industry. In 5 months' time, could I be displaced by someone like this, right? Would someone like this be a more compelling speaker? Would someone like this be actually able to deliver a speech that is far more engaging with all kinds of bells and whistles? So we are already seeing, for example, universities facing a kind of existential crisis, right? Like, how do we continue to ensure that universities have a role to play if students are engaging in a lot of self-instruction via things like ChatGPT and all kinds of generative AI? So let me then take a sort of step back and share with you my research so that you've got a better picture of where a lot of my observations come from. So principally, when I was doing my PhD in London 20 years ago, it was the dot-com boom. And back in the day, during the dot-com boom, Singapore didn't have that many universities with that many positions. And I thought to myself, okay, if I'm going to do my PhD thesis, I better make sure that my PhD thesis has got some commercial application. If I don't make it to a university, I can join, Accenture or all of these consultancies. And so I became quite intrigued by online shopping because I was seeing people around me use it. And so I started to, research into people's online shopping behavior, except that in a school like the London School of Economics, people are always talking about Marx, Hegel, Karl Popper, and so on. And so when you say, I'm studying online shopping, people are like, are you really kidding it? Yeah. So there was that sense of, imposter syndrome and so on, right? But it would actually be one of the best things I could have chosen for myself. Because by observing how people engage with interfaces, I started to understand a lot of the kinds of gratifications people derive. I started to understand a lot of the resistance people can exhibit, as well as the different kinds of cognitive processes that go through their minds, as well as socio-emotional factors that come into play in terms of how they interact with interfaces. So I then returned to Singapore in 2003, and it was like a whole new country from the one that I had left. Because when I had left, people were maybe using dinky little feature phones. When I came back, suddenly mobile broadband was everywhere. Broadband was everywhere. And there was growing societal concern about families using phones and not talking to each other. So I came back and there was all this moral panic, all this anxiety. There were government committees that were really curious about the impact of mobile phone communication on families. And so I thought, okay, at that time I could count like on the one hand, the number of people doing my kind of research, one hand. And I thought to myself, okay, this will be my thing because I'm fascinated by it, I'm intrigued by it. And so I did. And so what was interesting was that in the course of doing the research, I started to understand a lot of the different kinds of digital literacy challenges that people have. And with all of the new waves of technology, you realize that the same challenges they face in the home will be the same challenges they take to the workplace. And so this was where my work very, very naturally gravitated into the future of work. And as you've seen in your visits to Singapore, our friends from Rotterdam, you will have seen that this is a heavily digitalizing, heavily technologizing society. So there is a lot of change going on. People feel insecure. People feel that fear of being displaced. And so for me to gravitate my work from the home to the workplace was a very natural thing. And then 7 years ago, I was given an opportunity to be the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Singapore University of Technology and Design, which basically is a university that just teaches engineers and architects. And I thought to myself, okay, I've got all this incredible research findings about the impact of technology on families, on people, on employees, but it's getting really scary, the kind of impact it's having on people. I need to be taking my findings to people who are designing these infrastructures so that they know what kind of impact that they are making and they know how they can make, or they better understand how they can make their technology more humane. And so when the SUTD gig came out, I thought, okay, I'm going for this, which was fantastic because, I started to work with engineers. I started to learn all kinds of stuff about IoT, sensors, actuators, blockchain, and so on. But anyway, I wanted to share this picture with you because in many ways, I think my career has followed the progression of sports. Not with the brick phone, I'm not that old, but somewhere along the Nokia onwards, yes, that's my career trajectory is kind of along that. But certainly when you think about how people call generative AI the iPhone moment for AI, the smartphone, that iPhone moment was really something remarkable because the iPhone came when I had my second child. And it was amazing the way in which just the fact that the smartphone was in my life with my second child, that my life became so much more stressful because there was so much communication across families, across schools, across teachers, and so on. And that was actually the topic of research that I did, which I wrote in my book. So anyway, I'm just going to leave my life story for a while and move on to, let me continue. So anyway, what I have done in the course of all of these technological changes is that obviously I have developed a highly sharpened sense of human-centric aspects of technology. How are people accepting it? What challenges them? What makes them feel that sense of frustration, that sense of disorientation, that sense of anxiety? And in the course of all this, I've also had the opportunity to be a member of parliament, where I also understood how policy change, how ensuring that people don't feel left behind is very much interlinked with this whole idea of technologization. Because if you're living, you're making your living, you are raising your family in a technologizing society, you want to feel that sense of confidence, you want to feel that sense of assurance. So I have to say that all of these opportunities have aligned very nicely with the fact that I've got that sharpened sense of human aspects of technology adoption. And so this is my monthly column where I get to write all my shower thoughts. But it's really good fun because every time I write something, somebody will give me all kinds of feedback, and it just gives me even more insights into human aspects of technology. So let me then leave my journey for a while to share with you what I think are the 4 Ds that will actually help you in terms of adapting to the AI accelerated era. And the 4 Ds are essentially to have a digital mindset, to embrace dynamism, to develop depth, as well as to sharpen your distinctiveness. So I'm going to unpack each of these for you. I'm going to be also making reference to this report, which is a very, very useful report by an agency in Singapore called Skills Future. And if you've just been introduced to Singapore briefly, you will realize that the government plays a very big role in our lives here. And Skills Future is the agency that looks after upskilling for adults, so that people, will constantly be refreshing their skills, people will acquire new competencies, people can upskill themselves for career goals. And so this Skills Future, Skills Demand for the Future Economy report is a very important report because they track a lot of data in terms of employment trends in order to see which are the skills that are in demand and which are the skills that seem to be fading away. And it helps people to then, think about how to plan for the future. So I'll be referencing this report from time to time, and it will be quite interesting. So let me begin by talking about the first D, which is the digital mindset. And the digital mindset is actually a fantastic book that I read maybe 2 years ago. And to me, this book, Digital Mindset, is remarkably empowering for people who are not exactly techie, but who nevertheless want to prepare themselves for work in a digitalizing society. So, as I explained to you earlier, I'm a social scientist. I'm not one of these, tech wizards. I don't code, I can't program to save my life. And yet I'm able to work with engineers, I'm able to talk to programmers, I'm able to, make myself understood. And a lot of this is definitely to do with having what is called a digital mindset. And this particular book, how it unpacks it for you, is that it says that, look, when you are working in a digitalizing workplace, clearly you're going to have to collaborate and work with machines. And when you work with machines, one of the first mistakes you would commit, and many people do this with ChatGPT, one of the mistakes you commit is to assume or to forget that the machine is a machine. And many people start to anthropomorphize the interface. They start to humanize it. I know someone I met in Norway who named ChatGPT, and she would talk to ChatGPT like it was a friend. And there are all kinds of people who will actually thank ChatGPT every time to say thank you, but now why don't you do it differently? And of course, the joke is that, if you thank ChatGPT when the robot apocalypse comes along, they won't kill you because you thanked them. So, well, anyway, that's one of the first mistakes you could ever make about AI, right? To forget that it is artificial and you imagine that it's human. And once you remember that it is not human, you will then know how to use it in such a way that it gives you the results that you want. So this digital mindset, the first point about working with machines is remember that these are machines. So that's a very important thing to bear in mind. And then, of course, there is understanding the nomenclature, which is that if you're going to work in cross-functional teams, you're going to have a lot of people talk about all of these new digital infrastructures. They're going to be using all kinds of terms. You should yourself know that. Even if you don't understand what their architecture looks like, you don't understand the engineering behind it, you should at least know the terms and know what they're referring to. So that's something very useful that you can do for yourself. And the other part of collaboration is that when you're working in a digitalized workplace, and many of you will be familiar with this because during COVID, we worked online a lot, is that you no longer have that interaction that the office environment naturally creates. So you have to make sure that you have a digital presence in whatever online work teams that you're a part of so that people actually remember that you are their colleague, right? And if you don't build that presence, you just get forgotten and you're going to be overlooked for all kinds of opportunities, for all kinds of good projects and so on. So this aspect of that digital mindset to be, present, to be collaborative and to remember that you're working in machines is the first key. Now, the second part that they say is very important for the digital mindset is computation. So if you're not one of those who's highly computational, you're not very mathematical, you must nevertheless be able to understand data or able to critically assess data for its quality. And by the quality of the data, we're talking about the the provenance. Where did the data come from? And you also want to see the nature of the data. Is the data biased? Is it going to lead you to make all kinds of distorted conclusions? Because it's biased, right? So you should be able to call out and to recognize biased data if you have it. Now, then, of course, if you're going to work with data a lot, and some of the work that we do is going to depend quite heavily on data, some of the key decisions the company is making will be very data-driven. It's very important to know how much data to present to whom and in what form. Are you going to have to visualize it in a certain way so that people are able to follow your train of thoughts, so that people are able to be convinced by your argument? So these are, again, very interesting and critical aspects of managing data and computation with the digital mindset. And the last one is change, which is that you've got to accept that the digital world is one of constant change. And I can tell you, back in the day at LSE when I was doing my PhD, I don't know why I didn't choose something like medieval history or whatever, because every day I have to read all these tag logs and all just to keep up with everything, right? It's exhausting, but it's fun. But the change is truly constant. And in the last year, just looking at the kinds of advancements that generative AI has made, the rapidity of change has been nothing short of breathless. So when it comes to change, what are some of the critical aspects of change? Clearly, cybersecurity is going to be even more critical. The privacy of the data is going to be more closely scrutinized now with governance and compliance standards being raised. And then, of course, all of these challenges are going to be evolving endlessly. So again, change is a constant. And precisely because change is a constant, you've got to be agile, you've got to be constantly experimenting. You can't have the one and done attitude. It's got to be, you just keep trying, you just keep experimenting, and you see what works and what it is. So all this is very daunting to you. I have a nice postscript that will be reassuring. The 30% rule. The authors say that at the end of the day, in order to have an effective digital mindset, all you need is 30% fluency in each of these components. And you will be able to be working very effectively in a digitalizing workplace. So I hope that's of some assurance to you. Now, moving on from the digital mindset, the next aspect is obviously dynamism, right? And when I think about, the different kinds of ways in which technology has changed so much. So when I started my research, I was looking at families with feature phones. And there was so much struggle that the elderly were having in terms of putting in data in feature phones. And then suddenly you realize that, with smartphones and touchscreens, there's all kinds of new ways in which people can interact with technology. But at the same time, with location-based services, you find that, people are constantly using technology all the time. So with each of these waves of technological change, my research questions always had to change, and so did my research methods. It became always something like a moving target. I could never just sit still, I could never just use that same research method. And so over the course of time, I've, evolved so many of my research methods. I've had to incorporate new technologies. I've had to incorporate new kinds of efficiencies. And it's always about learning something new. So, even as I migrated my studies from the workplace, from the home to the workplace, and then now looking at broader issues around AI ethics, around data governance, there's always something new that you're going to have to learn. And so this is where, again, you've got to have that grit. You've got to just suck it up, roll with it, and really, really be adaptable. So the last point really is about curating resources and platforms to educate yourself. And people always ask me, how do you know so much? And truth is, I don't think I know as much as I could. But in order to know as much as I do, I actually put in quite a lot of work. So, for example, I'm on very many social media platforms, all the way from the old-fashioned Facebook to LinkedIn, to Instagram, to Discord, to TikTok. I have to experiment with all of that. And each of them will actually provide you with different kinds of knowledge, right? And you realize that if you are very concerted, if you are very conscious about the feeds that you follow, if you are very balanced in terms of the different kinds of influencers whose feeds, whose content you follow, you will actually have quite a multifaceted perspective on issues that are of interest to you. So for example, when I want to understand generative AI, one of the first people that I started to follow was this UPenn professor called Ethan Mollick. I don't know how many of you follow Ethan Mollick, but his posts are something like 10 a day on generative AI. And Ethan Mollick opens my eyes to all these amazing possibilities of generative AI. One day he would make Danny come up with new kinds of meats, new kinds of sausages based on some weird poem or something. And he'll do all these far-out experiments, right, that really show me how the technology can be pushed. But if I were just to follow Ethan Mollick, I would have a very one-sided picture of generative AI. I would be just so wowed by all of the possibilities. So then I've got to follow someone else, like Gary Marcus. And Gary Marcus is one of the great skeptics of generative AI, as well as all the bold claims around the powers of generative AI. So whatever sector you're in, if you want to keep yourself up to date, it's good to, curate all of these sources, but it's good to make sure that you've got a broad enough diversity of sources so that they are balanced and so that you are not, trapped into some kind of tunnel vision. So that's the dynamism, how to keep ahead of all of the changes. I wanted to share this with you. So this is a slide from the Skills Demand for the Future Economy report that I told you about that's done by Skills Future. And so this is where it's very interesting, right? Because what it said was that the top 10 demanded skills in the data management cluster remained relatively consistent, but customer data analysis, data protection, and AI application became more important in 2022. So these are new skills that are now very much in demand because, with compliance standards becoming stiffer, with all the awareness around AI ethics and fairness and transparency, you're seeing data protection becoming more closely watched. That kind of skill is now in greater demand. And then, of course, with the emergence of generative AI and all those companies I talked about in banking and healthcare and so on, they are looking for people with that ability to apply AI and to be able to work it into existing enterprise processes and all that. At the same time, on the left column, you will see that there are skills that have been consistently in the top 10 list. And these are kind of like the evergreen skills, right? So you've got engineering problem solving, automation research, human resource digitalization. So this slide alone tells you a lot in terms of what are the skills that companies still need, but what are the emerging skills that companies are now in growing need of. So that ties in with the point I was making about dynamism, that the picture on the right is going to constantly evolve, but there will also be some that will remain pretty stable. If you're interested, the entire report is available online. You can, bedtime reading. Now, on top of the dynamism, you want to develop depth. And depth is really important because you don't want to be that 15-minute expert. You want to be someone who people recognize as having that depth of knowledge in a particular sector. You want to have people look at you and have that confidence immediately that you know what you're talking about because you've been in the industry long enough, you've seen different waves of change in the industry, and you just are, an area expert, right? So this is where, and I looked at some of your bios, I see that, you're from areas as diverse as manufacturing, as mining, as consumer retail, and so on. And depending on the industry that you're in, by all means, develop that depth, develop that core competency that makes you someone who is really that reliable voice within your industry. And so this is where you can think about looking at what are the industry-specific competencies in your industry that have intersected with AI and how to brush up on these aspects. And then, of course, how do you then make sure your skills keep up? And so, again, I want to draw reference to the skills demand for the Future Economy report, where they looked at the top 10 demanded skills in business management. And in business management, you will see skills that are consistently in the top 10 in 2012, 2017, and 2022. So you've got documentation, writing clear and concise reports, which obviously now you can speed up with ChatGPT, but you've got to, do the due diligence and the checking and so on. But then you also see where there's a lot of need for things like policy assurance, right? And then business opportunities development, because who's going to seek out the sort of greenfield spaces, the spaces where the company should be entering. And at the same time, legal and compliance, again, as I said, the whole issue around governance is becoming more and more salient. And then at the same time, you've got sales and business development. So these are all skills that have been consistently in demand. But on the right is where, again, it gets interesting, because now you've got stakeholder management. And why is stakeholder management important? Because stakeholders are having changing expectations. Stakeholders, like your investors and so on, they're also concerned about how industries are transforming. And they're also concerned about how your company is adapting. So if you're someone who's good at stakeholder management, there's a lot you can offer to your company. And then, of course, governance, again, as I mentioned, and then process improvement. Now that you've got all of these disruptions in the workplace, how can you change the process? How can you make the process improvements a little bit more smooth sailing, a little bit more well accepted by the company? So these are some interesting skills that you can develop that depth of knowledge in, that are specific to your industry. And so you augment your existing industry inside knowledge with all of these different kinds of skills. Now, finally, the last D is distinctiveness. If you've got the digital mindset down, you've also been able to keep up with the dynamism. You're also developing that depth of expertise in your specific area. The last thing we want to bring to the table is to sharpen your whoosh, to sharpen your unique selling proposition. And this is where all of your human capabilities will come into play. So who was it who made 20 pens? So your social skills will come in so useful, right? Because you're the connector. You're the one who can bring people together. You're the one who can get teams to collaborate nicely. And this is where your human skills, your cross-cultural literacy, your communication, your persuasiveness, all of these will come in very, very useful, because you're the one who's the glue for the different teams that you're leading. So it's important to find your niche and to develop that distinctiveness. And I wanted to then end with adding the Skills Future report with this slide, because this is the top 5 demanded critical core skills. So these are critical core skills that are industry agnostic. It doesn't matter which industry you're from. These are the core skills that have been consistently in demand. And you will find that the top 3 demanded critical core skills are communication, being able to share information effectively, collaboration, working effectively with others, problem solving, identifying and solving problems, creative thinking, how to, think out of the box and come up with a solution that no one else envisioned. And finally, self-management. People want to work with functional people. People want to work with people who are confident and who are generally at peace with themselves, right? So knowing self-care is important. And so these are the critical core skills that are the true evergreens that will take you through whatever industry changes, that will take you through whatever digital disruptions, that will take you through all of the different waves of change that, our society seems to keep betting at us. So those are the 4 Ds that I think will help me to future-proof our lives. And again, coming back to those Japanese salarymen, their life is a whole different story, right? They never had to deal with all of these different kinds of change. Well, in their own way, they do. But that security of employment, that stability of the workplace, that security of income, I don't think many of us are going to experience that very much longer. So coming back to my own story, now when I joined SUTD, the University of Technology and Design, I was very much the classic social sciences, I study people, whatever. And then suddenly I'm thrown in the deep end with all of these engineers who are always talking about low latency communication, and all kinds of optimization and various kinds of programming codes and so on. And then I started working with them on things like cyber physical systems, again, on the Internet of Things, smart cities, and so on. And it was a fascinating move for me because even as it was new to me, it was not new to me. Because when I worked with the engineers, I could tell them, look, it's one thing to impose these kinds of digital infrastructures, but experientially, you've got to think about how people go through these smart cities, right? And one of the grants that they put in, where they invited me to join, I told them, look, you can't look at the smart city without looking at the social media connections that people are making with each other in the city. Then you're totally erasing a huge level of activity that's happening in the connected city. And it was sort of an aha moment for them because they just look at the society and the machines and they didn't really see the people. And they didn't see the connections that people were drawing with each other. So these are the fascinating ways in which you will find that your own skills will bring interesting insights into whatever conversation that you're having if you have the digital mindset and you're able to convey your ideas. So coming back to my LSE journey, I don't think when I was, in a social science university doing my PhD, that eventually I would publish in Nature about, people, COVID hotspots and super spreaders and so on. But I did because of the evolution that I had made, because of the fact that I learned about all the technologies, because of the fact that I was willing and compelled to cross disciplinary boundaries. But it's something that's been very rewarding. It's not easy, but I think it will be fulfilling if you put in the effort. So just to say also that because of the work that I have done on broader systems, broader policy changes and so on, with the whole sort of shift towards trust and safety, with the whole shift towards AI ethics and governance, I was also able to pivot very smoothly into these broader conversations. So now, I'm constantly working with, for example, computer scientists, engineers, people in the tech industry on issues around AI ethics and governance, on issues around online disinformation, on issues of online trust. And again, it's because of that willingness to sort of transcend different industry sectors and being able to cross different boundaries. So I wanted to say that I know it all seems very daunting, and it seems like, the execution task that you're just, pushing the ball up the hill, and then it's going to roll down again because there's going to be something new they are going to have to learn. I actually don't see it that way. I don't think the ball actually rolls back down the hill, because when you roll the ball up the hill, you've developed the muscle, so you're able to roll the ball again, or you're able to stop it from rolling back all the way, right? So I tend to actually be a lot more optimistic about it, and I tend to look at the possibilities. So this was generated by DALI because I said to DALI, develop a robot doing fun things like art and whatever. And some of the stuff was seriously dystopian, very fun. But I said to DALI, please make it more cheerful. And it came up with this, which I think is quite cheerful. And I truly feel that, if you are open to experimentation, if you're open to new ideas, if you are constantly learning new stuff and remaining curious, it will take you quite far in the face of change. So just a recap of the 4 Ds. Maintain or cultivate a digital mindset, whether it's with regard to collaboration, computation, or what was the last C? It was changed. And then obviously you've got to embrace dynamism. You've got to keep up with whatever evolutions, whatever trends, whatever shifts are happening. And then you want to develop that depth of expertise so that you always have that focus, right? So like in my case, it was always about the human-centric perspective. And I think that's always been my identity. So some people feel like, oh, it's so tiring to always have to reinvent yourself. But it's not true. You're not reinventing all of yourself. That core identity of you will remain, and then you just get more bells and whistles along the way. And then finally, what's the distinctiveness? What is that total package that you bring to the table? And a lot of that, is drawn from your inherent skills. And so this is my website. If you want to read my stuff, it's all online. And if you want to connect to me, that's me on LinkedIn. So thank you very much. No, thank you for the question. It's a senior management question, which I guess I have to step up to. I think, at SMU, actually, we are very fortunate. We've got a highly energetic executive development team and SMU Academy team. And I really take my hat off to my colleagues. If you want to talk about dynamism and embracing change, people like Eddie and Jack who head up the Academy, they're always rolling out new courses that provide you with that ability to skill up. And it's something that we take very seriously because clearly in Singapore, we have the challenge of shrinking cohort sizes. We've got an aging population, and yet we've got better life expectancy, which means a lot of us are going to work for far longer. Our lifetime of careers is going to have more careers than we ever planned for, right? And so these are all challenges that require that we upskill our workforce so that they don't feel alienated. So who knows what FOMO is? Yeah. And who knows what FOMO is? Yes.
Fear of
Fear of becoming obsolete. So that's the new fear, right? The FOMO, when you see all of these new AI transformations, when you see these new widgets that are emerging, you feel so anxious. And I have done research on the people in the workplace. They really do feel anxiety about the fact that their current competencies are being outmoded. They feel like they are going to become irrelevant, and that the anxiety channels into a kind of motivation to learn more and to learn better. And so that's where universities, we do have to up our game in terms of ensuring that our suite of provisions keep up with the times too. So we also have to embrace the affordance. Right. Well, you know me now. So yes, I don't mean to be flippant. You actually will benefit a lot from reading work by people who write about the social aspects and the human aspects of technology. And a lot of these are observations that are very powerful for design. So for example, we had the Simply Go saga, right? The payment card for the MRT. And a couple of weeks ago, the government in Singapore did an about turn where they had to change this card payment system because people were so frustrated with it. And I wrote a column explaining that the problem with this new card was that it didn't engender trust. People just didn't feel like they could trust the system because it never told them what they needed to know. It didn't tell them how much the trip cost. It didn't tell them how much money was left in the card. And so there was no inherent trust. And if there's no inherent trust, why would there be adoption? So it's important to read the sort of social side of, it's important to read analyses about the social aspects of technology that I think a lot of my computing colleagues are increasingly doing. So that's great. I do have to commend you. You express yourself very clearly. You communicate your ideas very well. So you've got, half the vessel one on a day. Yeah. How much time do you have? So I think I know. So if you are still stuck here, 1 week later, it's his fault. Okay. So the thing is, and you're from Europe, and the Rotterdam group are now in Europe. So you would have appreciated the fact that Europe clearly has got very strong sense of consciousness about privacy, about individual rights. And I think that's where, things like GDPR and all that have been very useful in terms of pushing the envelope on AI ethics, privacy, governance. And that's been, I think, something to be commended, because if not for Europe sort of pushing that frontier, we would probably have technology that is quite disrespectful of whatever rights we have. And, tech companies, they will scamper all over you if you give them the chance, right? That's where I have been somewhat concerned about the rise of super apps in Asia. So if you think about Asia, you've got super apps like, what's the one in China? WeChat. Yes, and then you've got things like Gojek, yes, Grab. And these are all the super apps which allow you to do numerous things, right? You can book tickets, you can buy food, you can whatever. And the problem is that there are so many conveniences built into them that people start to be very transactional in their approach to these platforms. And they start to think, well, I can give them my data because it's convenient. And because you become so comfortable with sharing your data with one company, then you think, well, I can give my data to this other company because they're going to give me convenience. And so then you start to have your sensitivities around your data becoming whittled away, and you start to give it away very freely in a way that may not translate well for you. Let me just talk about EdTech, for example. In a lot of schools now, there are EdTech platforms which are capturing a lot of data about students' learning. A lot of this, and a lot of EdTech companies, their data governance isn't very, very strong. So there have been EdTech companies where their databases have been hacked into, there's data around children, around students and all that. And who knows how that data is going to be used or misused and abused, and it's going to somehow, somewhere find its way back to the child's life when he or she becomes an adult, right? And so this is where I think, the cultural differences around things like data privacy, the cultural expectations around rights and so on, I think these differences actually help us to see what is possible and help us to see what could be happening that is unhealthy and that we should try to sort of moderate and to push back. And again, as I said, it's a very long conversation, but there are certainly cultural differences, and even in the way interfaces are designed. So for example, there's something called dark patterns, right? Where if you go into an interface, there are certain dark patterns that designers will use in order to steer you towards making certain decisions. How do they position the buttons? How do they lay out the choices? These little designs can actually nudge you towards doing something that you might not otherwise do. And again, this is also an issue of ethics, right? How do we ensure that there are countries out there that will say, we are going to regulate against dark patterns. We're going to regulate against designs that disadvantage users, that don't transparently tell them that this is what we're doing to manipulate your choices. So we definitely should look around the world to see how different countries are responding to socio-technological challenges, because no one has gotten any of it figured out. And whatever experiments in whatever country is getting us individuals better rights, better protections, we should explore and support those. Yes. So that's a really good question. And that also has kept me busy in my research, because when we were looking at the companies all the way from the small and medium enterprises to the big MNCs, we realized that different companies have different capacities to support their employees through the transformation. So SMEs, they're so strapped. They can't afford to release people for training. And the bosses will say, oh, I don't want to train my staff because when they get trained, somebody else is going to hire them. And then where do I start? And so there's that close-mindedness. And these bosses will sometimes choose not to transform because it's just too much effort. It's just too much work. And let alone to support the individual. Now, you will be relieved to know that there are many countries like Singapore where there are agencies like SkillsFuture looking at upskilling. And I'm sure in Europe, many of, Sweden, for example, Switzerland, Germany, they've all got very robust upskilling programs. And I think those are the programs that can come in where organizations feel their employees. There are organizations like MNCs, as I said, that are much more well-resourced. Some of the organizations that I studied were really advanced in terms of thinking about career progression pathways for employees. They saw that there was a growing need for people in cloud, and they would actually have employees in particular tracks be upskilled so that they could migrate into cloud. So they didn't have to leave the organization, they could actually grow within the organization. But I don't think it's something that every company can do. And so what we're trying to do in Singapore is to have groups of companies that are in similar areas collaborate to provide training on a more comprehensive perspective. And the other thing also is that some of our interviewees, when we interviewed them about upskilling, the middle managers are very important. Because if your middle manager, your line officer, doesn't approve your leave or your time off to go for your training, then hey, you're left to struggle, right? So that's where, again, companies have to be a little bit more assertive in terms of implementing policies that support upskilling. And these are not things that come naturally to organizations. Organizations are very bottom line driven. But I think with greater sort of sharing of best practices, with greater kinds of industry collaboration type training programs, there can be a more systematic way of supporting the workforce through change. So I answered this question, No, I just, because I'm actually the vice president of the Women in Tech chapter of the Singapore Computer Society, and that's exactly what keeps us awake at night. How do we, get more women into the tech industry? In the first place, I think in Singapore, we're quite fortunate because women are not deterred from doing STEM. In some countries, there's a sort of dumbing down culture where women don't want to do STEM because it's just not considered, attractive or whatever. But in a lot of Asian countries, actually women in STEM, in terms of enrollment in school, the number is quite healthy. The problem then lies in the workforce, where there will be issues along the way when women join the workforce, and those who settle down will then have to sort of leave the industry because they can't do the work-life balance thing. They've got to still care for their kids. And that's where, companies that have parental leave policies that allow male employees to support to support childcare, maternity leave and all that, will help to make it more inclusive. At the same time, we also need to have more sponsorship programs within companies so that female employees within male-dominated companies will actually have someone to advocate for them, someone to recognize different career opportunities for them. And then, of course, there is that whole sort of role modeling issue. If you don't have enough women ascend to senior management, the young women will look up, will be like, there's no one there. All I see are these middle-aged white guys, and so they feel like they don't have a future in this company, right? And so this is where that sort of pipeline issue, making sure that the different layers of leadership are staffed with women or are well represented, it's all very important. And then, of course, to create opportunities for women to basically professionalize themselves in all kinds of ways, especially in areas where women are underrepresented. But yes, we appreciate allies like you. So thank you.